Hello, Lisa Dudkowski, Certified Financial Planner, Global Fertility Business Intelligence. We're into August. School's starting for the kids in Northern Illinois, Chicago, and political season is heating up. We have about 14 months, a little over 14 months to go until the 2024 federal elections, where we're going to FJB Biden, Trump 2024, eventually will fire Pritzker, and Darren Bailey for the 12th Congressional District, the southern third of Illinois, everything south of I-70, but it's a whole southern third of the state near the Quad Cities, the communist corridors, but we need to save the 12th Congressional District and bring Darren Bailey for Congress into that district. And then here up north, Lake County, we need to bring Joe Severino into the 10th Congressional District, Republican, of course, to replace Brad Schneider, who last year was had police incidents at his house, Deerfield police, with prostitution, a dispute between him and the prostitute. This is Congressman Brad Schneider, Democrat, 10th Congressional District. I've seen the evidence. He was having a spat with a prostitute when his wife was out of town in Deerfield, Illinois. We don't know if this was a male prostitute. We don't know if this was a transgender prostitute, but any type of prostitute is illegal to have come to your home to provide sexual services. So Brad Schneider has not answered to that FOIA that was secured by Joseph Severino for the 10th, and he's going to have to answer to prostitution charges. But today we learned on the Revelators radio show, WCGO in Evanston, Illinois, that this was actually sourced last year, but Joe's a strong Republican, a Trump supporter, a Darren Bailey supporter, an anti-Brad Schneider contender. But Joe brought on a lesbian, forgot her name, Kirsten something, on his show. You can watch it when he posts it, WCGO, the Revelators, who was arrested and is going to have to spend 11 months in prison for peacefully protesting and supporting the Constitution and the President of the United States, when our own DOJ, FBI, and three-letter agencies were plants to make this appear to be an insurrection. But it was called upon to be a peaceful protest, and we learned that Congressman Brad Schneider, Illinois 10th Congressional District, had Sterling Carter, his congressional aide, young man, also known as Sterling McRae, Sterling Devion Carter, Sterling Devion McRae, Sterling Carter, Sterling McRae. Bunch of aliases. And Sterling Carter bought a Ford Taurus car. It was unmarked. It was disguised with computers and lights as an FBI or some type of undercover agent vehicle. He brought loaded, unregistered firearms, and he was posing as an agent within steps of the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump. This is Brad Schneider, our local congressman for the 10th Congressional District's aide, Sterling Carter, Sterling McRae, was with loaded weapons pretending to be a federal agent within steps of the president on January 6th, and all this arranging leading up to it. And last year, Mr. Severino sourced that Brad and his wife, they had strange stock transactions in Trupanion stock, a small pet type of company. And so, he also said today on the show that Sterling kind of laundered $80,000 out of Brad's personal account to fund this malfeasance at the Capitol. But this was written about in numerous magazines and online last year, and the DOJ let the young man off with a slap on the wrist. And last I checked, middle of last year, he was still arranging meetings with the Middle East and Libya for Mr. Schneider. So he was doing foreign relations and still active on a phone list, and didn't lose his job even though he was armed illegally within steps of the president. So riveting radio show today, The Revelators, which means to reveal the truth. So Joe Severino took over the show from a deep state political operative named Patrick J. Gibbons. Patrick J. Gibbons had invited him on as a guest. He called me. I tuned in to watch it, or listen and later watch it. And I said, well, these are the biggest deep state thugs of Pritzker in my neighborhood as the guests on the show. And what's going on is the callers into the show. So a bunch of things happened, and now it's the Joe Severino, The Revelators show. So they got rid of this young man whose claim to fame is that he claims he took down Paul Vallis and is shaking him down for $800,000. So this is a young man who claims to be a gangster, a real live gangster. He has fantasies about it. And he claims that people pay him cash to do things like fake Facebook profiles where he pretends to be other people and puts all this racist stuff out there. And he claims credit for taking down Vallis, and now he claims credit for shaking down Vallis for $800,000, and even sent me a press conference to impress me where he was shaking down Vallis for $800,000. So I don't know what's going on with these people. Pritzker should know better than to have his thugs run around yet another election year. But anyway, it's very interesting what's going on in Lake County. So they have this woman, Mary Cole, who Keith Brin, the GOP chair for Lake County, who replaced Mark Shaw last year. They just got rid of Mark Shaw all of a sudden, put Keith Brin up, who I believe was the county clerk for a number of years in Lake County. And he put up this woman, Mary Cole, for state's attorney, who's a Democrat. And the chair of the board, Margie Kubalanza, lives in Wisconsin and has voted for 3 of the past general elections in Wisconsin. Her husband has voted for 10 of the past general elections in Wisconsin. So I don't know what's going on in Lake County, but we have Keith Brin he's the registered agent for COR Strategies, a young millennial, Colin Corbett, who has been in bed with Keith Brin for many years. And the lawyer, Keith Brin, pays Colin Corbett. So he works as his lawyer and corporate agent on COR Strategies, but yet the GOP Lake County chair pays young Colin Corbett. So why is the lawyer paying his client? Shouldn't the client be paying the lawyer? And what kind of political strategizing is Keith Brin getting when he's not running for anything? And they're funded by the Leadership Institute, which was sourced by Mr. Severino and his legal and campaign team, I guess. But they received that verification in writing that Keith Brin and Colin Corbett are doing candidate training with the Leadership Institute, which is a approximately $40 million not-for-profit in Alexandria, Virginia, Washington, D.C., and its sister organization, the Leadership Institute, is in Chile, run by Dario Paya. Dario Paya started the UDI, the Liberal Party of Chile, the governmental regime, in 1991. And his co-founding partner of UDI was assassinated, or maybe he was assassinated shortly after they founded in 1991. Well, Dario Paya went on to marry Bettina von something, and she's involved in the new constitution of Chile this year. She partners with not-for-profits in Washington, D.C., and she also was one of the heads of the central bank in Chile. So Dario Paya went to high school in Maryland and got a State Department, a United States State Department grant to be trained to run the Chilean government when he was an adult. And I guess it's going well for him, since 2021 tax returns show that the Leadership Institute paid him, Morton Blackwell, 83 years old, paid Dario Paya $192,000 to run the Leadership Institute Chile. And their website shows that all the schools, colleges, high schools have unique ID numbers, and they do advocacy through campus reform and other offshoots of the Leadership Institute. And they're training young communists since 1979. They say young conservatives, but it's young communists, to overthrow governments. And we've seen this in South America, and we've seen this in Asian countries and other countries, you know, Myanmar, Philippines, a lot of countries in South America. So the Leadership Institute is very involved in how they want governments to be, either owned by the United States of America, DC swamp, or subservient to the rest of the world. So the Leadership Institute is one half a foreign organization run in South America and Chile, but yet Colin Corbett and Keith Brin are not registering through the FARA Act, Foreign Agents Registration Act. It's a federal act, as foreign agents. They're acting as foreign agents because they're trying to influence, they're the rhinos trying to influence the Republican elections to let the Democrats stay in power for foreign countries. So in 2018, Trump came out with an executive order where the penalties for interference in a foreign interference in an election and treason and sedition and all these things is death. The penalty is death for interference in United States elections. Well, that's interesting, because we have Colin Corbett of COR Strategies and Keith Brin interfering with Lake County elections and with Darren Bailey's sure win against Mike BOST of the 12th Congressional District, the 3rd Southern region of Illinois. Mike BOST is bought. He was a petty officer, lowest ranking type of officer in the United States Marines after high school, 1979 to 1982, and he was discharged. We don't know. We haven't FOIA'd why he was discharged. It doesn't say dishonorably, but it could have been for mental illness, because he's known as Meltdown Mike. Mike BOST. BOST is bought. BOST is bent, severely bent. He's known on the congressional floor as Meltdown Mike for his anger management problem. He rips at microphones and throws them, and throws paper, and vulgarity streams out of his mouth, whether he's talking about, you know, anything. He just, once he didn't feel like he had enough time to review a bill before voting, and he was very angry, and he started throwing things and swearing, hurling vulgarities, and like yanking at the microphone and throwing it. And this has happened repeatedly. It's all over YouTube. Anyone could look up Meltdown Mike BOST, 12th Congressional District. And the thing that bothers me the most about Mike BOST is he's a bigot. He's against IVF, in vitro fertilization, human reproduction help. He's against procreation for veterans who need help. So how can he say he's for veterans when he doesn't want them to be able to utilize in vitro fertilization? And when he was ranting like a psychopath, bent BOST, on the floor of the House, he didn't even pronounce it right. He called it intro veto fertilization. He doesn't even know what it is, and said nobody that's a veteran should be allowed to make a baby in a petri dish and shove it on a shelf until they're ready to use it, which shows he's ignorant, he's uneducated, he's only a high school graduate. So an embryo is made with sperm, human egg and sperm, in a lab into a blastocyst, but it's not put on a shelf, Mike BOST. It's put in a cryo tank at negative 196 degrees Celsius in liquid nitrogen. It's not put on a shelf. It's not made in a petri dish. I mean, you probably call it a test tube baby still. You don't know what you're talking about. But veterans, a woman might not have a uterus. She might have anovulation. She might have PCOS. She might have endometriosis. She might be a lesbian or just want to be a single mom. A man might have male factor infertility and might not have sperm that work well. A man could be gay and have social infertility. There's a lot of reasons that male sperm might not work and why people might need to make a baby in a lab, Mike BOST. In vitro fertilization has made millions and millions and millions of deserving people parents around the entire world. You should look into American Society of Reproductive Medicine, European Society of Human Reproduction and Embryology, the Middle Eastern Fertility Society, and on and on and on. Human reproduction is what makes the world grow. Does Mike BOST not want to make the world grow? He also didn't speak out against the experimental vaccinations and the forced masking and the global shutdown. So he wants our military to be not able to procreate, because he said that. He screamed about it on the House floor. He wants our military to be forced to have vaccinations. Darren Bailey, his opponent, was the first person ever in the history of the world to speak out against, see, that's Fire Pritzker, speak out against JB Pritzker, and called him the tyrant and the oligarch and the dictator that JB Pritzker is. And that was last year when Darren Bailey ran for governor and beat about 8 or 9 other candidates to win the primary, including Richard Irvin, who was bought by the globalists. Big score, big win for Darren Bailey. Trump wholeheartedly supports Darren Bailey. And Darren Bailey was the first person ever to speak out against Pritzker, JB Pritzker. So, you know, he's a brave man, he's a strong man, and he's a leader, and he's willing to do what needs to be done to fix Illinois and take out all the corruption. Mike BOST is part of the corruption. He's a rhino who's owned by the globalists because he just has a high school education and an anger management problem and couldn't even survive in the Marines. He was a petty officer who had to be discharged and go drive a truck. Somebody put him in, helped him get into Congress, and he doesn't have any skills other than ranting and being called Meltdown Mike and being a bigot against procreation for veterans. So Mike BOST is on his way out because he's owned by the globalists in the Quad Cities and communist corridors down in southern Illinois. So we have Illinois Manufacturers Association, which has been owned by China for 130 years, which is just now starting to support, as of the last few months, Illinois manufacturing because of Trump. I mean, it's because of Donald Trump. But every prior administration wants to gut and destroy America and depopulate the world and take America. So, you know, Darren Bailey is the first person that stood up to Pritzker, and we love him in Chicago. We love Darren Bailey in the North Shore suburbs, Northern Illinois, Western suburbs. All of Illinois loves Darren Bailey. He probably even won the election against Pritzker. So, unfortunately, the Leadership Institute did a podcast from the Illinois State Fair, which had almost 650 views as of a few hours ago. And they took Rhonda Belford hostage. She's the committee woman, some big political volunteer for the central region of Illinois. But she was on the podcast with 4 millennials, scrawny millennials. One of them was chunky, but mostly scrawny millennials. And they had Rhonda, who's in her 50s, probably mid to late 50s, sitting hostage between these vulgar, rhino millennials, Colin Corbett and Steve McClure, who's kind of a newbie state senator. He's, I believe, 39 years old. So Steve McClure didn't even appear to be wearing underwear and had some like hernia problem. Either that or he was trying to look like Long Dong Silver and attract the women in the video. But it was just disgusting to have to see a man in thin jeans not wearing underwear, but he is the face of an 11-year-old girl, and he was ripping on Darren Bailey over and over like a third grader, like, oh, Darren Bailey just sits and checks his Facebook likes all day, and Darren Bailey hasn't been genuine in his whole life. So it was cringeworthy to see how many people, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people trying to tear down Darren Bailey. And they're just millennial, Pritzker thugs, because they were all brown-nosing Pritzker. So these are supposed to be Republicans, the Leadership Institute. And Rhonda Belford, I know, is a Republican, but she's being held hostage by rhinos. And she said she's doing all the statewide training for chairmen and precinct committeemen and candidate training with them. That's the Leadership Institute. Go to their website. They're doing communist training all over the state of Illinois to train young people to overthrow the United States government, to be rhinos, to be radical leftists, to align with the most radical leftists. Those are called rhinos, Republicans in name only. And I don't think Rhonda knows, but I sent her a note that she can't do training for the Leadership Institute. Nobody can go around the United States of America doing candidate training because it's a foreign terrorist organization. Look at what's happening to their candidates getting assassinated in South America. They can't do candidate training here. They train agitators. They train rioters. Campus reform is one of their offshoots. They have schools numbered on their website, in their system, and they're creating intelligence files on schools in the United States. It's a national security risk. It's an intelligence agency risk to even have Morton Blackwell's The Leadership Institute operating. All funds, Dario Paya's Leadership Institute, Morton Blackwell's Leadership Institute, need to be frozen and not-for-profit status immediately removed. And same with the American Enterprise Institute, $350 million organization, Dick and Lynn Cheney, which is operating in the 9th Congressional District and the North Shore all of last year. They're the ones funding these thugs going around trying to slate candidates. So we have a $350 million organization run by traitors to the United States of America, Dick and Lynn Cheney, and rhinos. And then we have the Leadership Institute, which gives its biggest amount of funding to Dario Paya and Turning Point USA. This is not okay, and it's not going to stand. And if the Leadership Institute does be allowed to keep doing training all over the United States of America, it's only going to be to compile evidence on them to find them guilty of treason later against the 2018 Trump executive order. So what's going on in Lake County, Illinois, and the North Shore in Chicago, Illinois, is really, really scary. We have people like Keith Brin, who was asking, what's his name? That Indian candidate, I call him Ramen Noodle. What's his name? Vikram Ramen Noodle, Ramasama Ramen Noodle. But so Keith Brin was asking him a question the other day, or a series of questions, and then he was saying, I've been pro-life since kindergarten, and making all these weird hand motions. So he's a guy in his 30s, another millennial, who is an actor running on the Republican ticket to make Republicans look like bozos. But he's the only bozo because, first of all, pro-life is a communist term, and we all support safe and rare abortion. So Republicans are not anti-abortion, they're anti-communism. There's a difference. So keep an eye on Keith Brin, the Leadership Institute, Colin Corbett in Lake County. But watch the smoke-filled room at the Illinois State Fair. It's really atrocious how these young men are brown-nosing Pritzker, like Michael Butler. I think he was the one that said, oh, Pritzker's so good with people and so likable and so funny. And they're all saying, oh, he's so good with people and so funny. Well, what did he do, Michael Butler? Tickle your tummy? Were you his Tickle Me Elmo? Was that what made you laugh about Pritzker? Because I don't think that shutting down the world and helping develop the T3 saliva testing, the CLIA lab saliva testing at U of I with China, I don't think that was funny or likable to subject people to stay at home for 2-3 years, to subject people to cover their faces, their mouths and nose, and suffocate themselves in masks for 2 to 3 years. I don't think that was likable to force vaccinate people and threaten their jobs if they didn't do experimental vaccines, which many people are having cardiac problems, heart attacks, dying. I mean, I think we all know people that have developed cancer or cancers and who have died that were vaccinated. I can count on 2 hands the amount of people I know who have gotten cancers and or died that were vaccinated. So nothing about Pritzker's behavior the past few decades, but especially since COVID, is likable. So for Colin Corbett and Steve McClure and that guy Chris and Michael Butler to go on TV, these 4 millennials, and go on and on about how likable Pritzker is when he's the one driving with U of I and Zhejiang University, the shutdown of the world. Something is wrong with that. Something's wrong with the Leadership Institute when they would disparage Darren Bailey, who's the best candidate for governor that Illinois has ever had. I mean, since I liked Harold Washington in the 80s, but I was a kid. Since Harold Washington, I would say Darren Bailey is the best candidate for governor non-rhino that we have ever had in Illinois. The old guard and the mafia, the rhinos, the globalists are going to be taken down. So, Colin Corbett, you need to resign. Your COR Strategies is a traitorous organization because you're funded by the Leadership Institute. In fact, you started COR Strategies with Jeremy Rose, who had to leave because he forcibly restrained a woman and sexually harassed her in his house and would not let her leave his house. That's published. That's fact. He's now running Advocate with an 8, Advocate with an 8 in Washington, D.C., which works with Netflix and Google and YouTube and the globalists. This is like the young leaders of America. It's what George Soros did. It's where all the AOCs of the world come from in the squad. It's George Soros. It's Jocelyn Benson came from George Soros. They all come from George Soros. He did the Governor's Project, the Secretary of State's project, all types of young leaders projects. His Open Societies Foundation funded Black Lives Matters. And it's exactly that model that is funding the Leadership Institute, is funding young leaders exactly the same way George Soros did. And then we have other not-for-profits that are busy in Lake County doing really dirty things right now that we're not ready to release yet, but there are others. The candidates are aware of the dirty not-for-profits, and some of them are pop-ups that don't even have 501(c) status yet. So Lisa Dukowski, Global Fertility Business Intelligence Certified Financial Planner, Global Political Business Intelligence. It's all public. When's it going to stop? Thank you. God bless.